You're watching 12 WKRC TV, a new generation of news. 12 Newsmakers starts now.
Good morning and welcome to Newsmakers. No matter where you live, the ballot is chock full of races, following the presidential race, the local congressional race, a Senate race if you live in Ohio, not to mention races for state legislator, county commissioners, treasurers, coroners, etc., etc. It's difficult to follow all those races. What can easily get lost are the ballot issues. This morning we focus on two of those issues. We begin with Ohio Issue 1. Ohio Issue 1 proposes that the voters authorize the state to issue $400 million of bonds for conservation purposes. This includes the issuance of $200 million of general obligation bonds for Greenspace preservation. A second $200 million of bonds would be authorized for the purpose of cleaning up brownfields, old industrial sites. To discuss Issue 1, I am joined by Randy Welker, the Executive Director of the Greater Cincinnati Port Authority, which purchased its first brownfield less than a week ago, and Rachel Belz is the Southwest Director of Ohio Citizen Action, an environmental education and lobbying group. Welcome to Newsmakers, both of you. Thank you. Randy, let's start by just very quickly, the short history. Where did this issue come from in your mind?
There's a need in Ohio to do something. We haven't been. We're behind everybody else. You look at other states on conservation issues and on brownfield issues, they're way ahead of us. Michigan, for instance, has been there doing great things. We don't have any great programs which have moved this along. So some people are skeptical about, why greenfield and brownfield? Well, we finally brought them together. There are some similarities and needs. We need green space, but to preserve green space, you're going to have to go back in and redo some of our older industrial areas so you don't continue taking green space. So there's a similarity between the two issues. It's just time. We've got to do something in this state to make us proactive in cleaning up our old industrial and protecting our green space.
Rachel, would you disagree that Ohio is behind and needs to do something?
No, I agree that Ohio is behind. I think what we will disagree on, though, is the way to go about it. I feel, and Ohio Citizen Action and our members feel, that what needs to happen instead is for the Ohio EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, to start enforcing the laws we have on the books when it comes to who cleans up these sites. Should be those who polluted them rather than the taxpayers. And
we've got two different parts of this proposal. One's a greenfield part, one's a brownfield. And let's take them one at a time. We're going to spend most of the time on the brownfields because I think that's where the most interesting discussion is.
That's where the conflict is.
But let's be very clear to people. Greenfield proposal, $200 million. You're going to, the proposes that the state would acquire green areas and preserve them. Concretely, what does that mean?
Well, there's a variety of ways you can do it, and I'm not their best spokesperson for this, but you can apply easements, you can get deed restrictions. It doesn't necessarily have to be that the state goes out and buys property.
So if you buy an easement, for example, how could you do that in a way that would be helpful to people?
Well, in other words, if you have an easement for a trail, or you have an easement for a passageway, and we're trying to do that in the Mill Creek Valley right now. We're trying to have a trail along the Mill Creek. You have to have that easement to protect that in perpetuity so you don't change it down the road.
So if it's private land, it may stay in private hands, but you buy an easement.
You bet. It's not near as costly as buying the whole property and saying we're going to restrict its use just for this.
Rachel, how does Ohio Citizen Action feel about the greenfield side of this?
If the greenfield side of it was the only portion that we were voting on, Ohio Citizen Action would be strongly behind it. As an environmental organization, we find it very difficult to be against that portion. That portion is a good portion. It's tied together because that's the only way the brownfields part will pass.
Okay. Now, let's talk about brownfields. Rachel, what is exactly a brownfield and what's being done now? You argue that something different should be done right now, but what is a brownfield and what are we facing here?
A brownfield is a contaminated site that really does need to be cleaned up. It is the opposite of a greenfield. It is the opposite of open space that is has no contamination, has not been used, farmland, for instance.
Right.
The opposite is often in urban cores, you have sites that are polluted and sites that have been contaminated,
Now, there would
such
be
as on the Mill Creek.
There'd be a full range. I mean, some of these sites would be very badly polluted with chemical pollutions that are very dangerous. Others would be less polluted, right? Not all brownfields are the same. Let's make that clear.
Absolutely. All brownfields are not the same.
Okay.
The portion that we have a real trouble with is how it's funded and bailing out the voluntary action program
What's the
at
law
the Ohio
now?
EPA.
What's the law now?
The law now is under the voluntary action program, which is a 4-year-old program here in Ohio. The redevelopers, the developer who wants to redevelop the site can apply for that under the voluntary action program. The voluntary action program has not been approved by the Federal Environmental Protection Agency. It's too flawed. It was supposed to generate money for the program. It's a flawed program, and this is a bailout of that program.
Randy, you've been working with brownfields. Is it a flawed, the VPA, is it a flawed program?
Well, they're currently working right now with US EPA to get a memorandum of understanding. The program has not been used. It's not a very good program from the sense that it's been productive. And so we both agree that maybe there are some things there. Our problem, where we basically disagree, is US EPA had the policy back in the 70s and 80s, the big stick. You go out and you get that guy, you beat him, you do whatever you can. The problem with they realized in the early 90s was that program didn't work. It didn't create new development. You didn't have things changing over. So they changed their philosophy. They said, you know what, we're going to start working with local communities. We're going to start working with developers and finding ways to actually get the property back into productive use, not necessarily beat everybody over their head. Sharonville's site is a perfect example. The guy went to jail. The company was bankrupt. There's nobody left to go after. Their position is that's the only way you're going to get brownfields redone. Ours is, you know what, I'm sorry, that didn't work in the 70s and 80s. We've changed now. We want to be progressive, and we as citizens are actually going to have to step forward. Let me just quick example. This company, Green Industries, you know what they made? Plating materials.
This is the company out in Sharonville where we just bought our first local brownfield
Exactly.
site. Okay, go ahead.
You and I grew up in a period where our cars had what? Bumpers. We loved chrome everywhere. This is the type of thing they did. And back then in that technology, they didn't necessarily take care of things very well once they got rid of them. That is the case in a lot of our old technology. Okay. Unfortunately, we as consumers didn't pay on the front end to take care of it. We're going to have to do that on the back end. There is nobody else to go forward with.
I'm always aware of time, so I want to keep moving here. Rachel, what about that? If the company's bankrupt, the person's already been punished. I'm accepting your characterization. I don't know this particular company. You know, what else can you do? Don't you have to turn to some other funding?
In those instances, then there are other options to look at. But the problem is that the Ohio EPA cannot soundly say that they've gone after all of the people who are responsible for the polluted sites. You know, with the exception that the Sharonville site or specific sites, they can't categorically say, we have done everything we can to get this site cleaned up from the polluter first, then the taxpayer or down the line.
Just to make this clear, though, in this bond issue, and it is not a tax, it's a bond issue. It will be paid back from other general fund issues and others. So we're not adding a tax.
Right.
It's specific. A polluter cannot take advantage of this program. It's going to be governments. It's going to be people like the Port Authority.
Isn't there a potential here that if I run a company that, okay, I don't know, chrome bumpers aren't made very much anymore, but a company that's prone to polluting, okay, I can say, well, I can sort of get away with anything because someday they'll take care of it. I don't have to worry about it because they're not going to come after me.
The true issue is we don't always think ahead. This week, information came out that said, what's going to be our next problem for our landfills, our old PCs?
Right.
Did we plan on that ahead of time? No, we developed a technology. We all have PCs. We have them in our offices. We have them in our homes. What are we going to do with those? We're going to now have to create a program that recycles them. But we didn't think of that on the front end. We didn't know that we were going to have this much of a problem. So we didn't pay the cost up front. It's the same thing over and over again. You get an old technology, it changes. We've got to be responsible, and somebody's got to do it. It might as well be us taxpayers, I guess. I mean, we've got to find a solution, otherwise it won't get done.
Rachel? Might as well be, inevitably, it's going to have to be us taxpayers?
I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think if the enforcement at the Ohio EPA level was truly the enforcement that it ought to be, then we could talk about everybody taking their piece of the pie and having to pay.
Is the issue really here that you have no confidence in the Ohio EPA? Is that a fair characterization?
That is a fair characterization, but that's not the only reason that
I don't want to say it's the only
group is against issue 1. You know, we have had a lot of problems with the Ohio EPA, and quite frankly, so does the federal EPA. They have launched an unprecedented investigation into the EPA in Ohio.
Who will manage these funds? Let's say, you know, let's just talk about the brownfield side of this. $200 million in bond money created, $50 million a year, by the way. Just that's the mechanism, but no big deal. Well,
$25 million goes to the VAP program.
Yeah, I don't want to get bogged down. Who manages those funds?
Two different groups.
Who makes the decisions?
Two groups. The Ohio Department of Development and Ohio EPA. Both are looking at right now setting up the type of rules and regs that are going to apply. But you'll be going through the Ohio Department of Development for most of the application process to determine whether your community wants this particular thing to be done.
Rachel, how about that? Is that an organization that you have any history with and feel? I mean, how do you feel about that way to administer this money?
We don't have a particular position about different agencies at the state of Ohio. We do know, though, that the entire reason this came about was because the Chris Jones and the folks at the Ohio EPA, under the administration, Voinovich, then now Taft, actually looked at how can we bail out programs like the Voluntary Action Program. That was why this was designed. There are no bones about that.
And I disagree. It doesn't have anything to do with the Voluntary Action Program. The only reason they're getting any portion of the monies is to make sure that there are situations in a community that cannot come forward and pay for it, like some of our smaller areas, and there's a brownfield there, they will come in and take care of it right away.
Let's just say, would you be better if there was also, besides this bond issue proposal, also an announcement about a change of rules at EPA and a commitment to enforcing the laws that exist and some ability to distinguish?
We're far beyond a change of rules at the EPA. It needs to be overhauled, and it needs to be overhauled now. There are too many problems with the EPA in Ohio, and we see them on a daily basis. We talk to the citizens who go to the EPA thinking that they're going to help them with whatever issue in their local community is the concern, and the EPA is not there for them.
Well, I'm out of time. This is a complicated issue, but I think you've done a good job in laying it out. Thank you very much for being here this morning. Stay tuned. After the break, we turn to issue 33, the proposed Cincinnati Public School levy.
Local funding is extremely important to continue our tradition of ensuring local control over educational decisions. So I'm here today to encourage the voters of Cincinnati to be good partners, to support your schools by voting yes on issue 33.
Welcome back. Besides the leaders of all three local political parties, the Democrats, the Charterites, and even the Republicans, Governor Bob Taft has lined up in support of the proposed Cincinnati Public School levy, Issue 33. Issue 33 is a $6 million operating levy. It is designed to raise $35.8 million a year for the schools. For the owner of a home valued at $100,000, the levy would cost an additional $184 a year. Although the funds to be raised by the new levy are for operating expenses in general, they are targeted. $11.9 million, 2 mills, will be used to reduce class size in grades K through 3. $5.9 million, 1 mill, will be devoted to building maintenance. Another $5.9 million will be devoted to improving achievement in neighborhood schools. The remaining $11.9 million that's left will be devoted to covering the cost of inflation. Although voters approved a levy renewal in March, the schools have had no new funds for 5 years. To discuss issue 33, I'm joined by two people. Lynn Marmer is a member of the Cincinnati Public School Board and the chair of the Finance Committee. Tom Brinkman, the former head of Coast, is a longtime opponent of increased taxes. Mr. Brinkman is also a candidate for the Ohio House of Representatives on the east side of town. As a result, he has not been a spokesman for Coast this fall, but because of scheduling conflicts, he has offered to join the discussion this morning. Lynn, Tom, both of you, welcome back to Newsmakers.
Thank you.
Lynn, as I mentioned, this essentially the same levy proposal, essentially the same proposal, was made back in March. I know there's been some tweaking of it, but the idea about the size and targeting the way it's going to be used, that was proposed to voters back in March. What can you offer voters this time around to indicate things have either changed or, as you tried to argue last time, things are on a path of improvement?
Well, I don't agree with you that it was the same levy that was offered in March, but that's really
Okay, well,
not important.
Is it importantly different? I don't want to
I think it is. I think it is important.
Well, tell me that. I don't want to mischaracterize it.
Because this is a very, very, very clearly targeted levy. It's going to go for three very specific things. One is smaller class sizes for grades K to 3. The second is better buildings, and the third is strengthening neighborhood schools, and that's really where the focus is. And I'm not sure that that focus was as clear the last time.
So maybe it's sharpened up a little bit. Yeah, I recognize that. Okay.
And
well, how have things changed?
Well, I think we have a great example of why having smaller classes, we believe, will have a dramatic improvement on student achievement. This summer, we had a mandatory summer school for all third graders who had not passed a standardized test. This was the first mandatory summer school of its kind in the state of Ohio. And what we learned from that is what you would believe you would see, which is that 65% of those children who were in the mandatory summer school passed that test. Why? Because they had smaller class sizes and because there was a high concentration on reading and math. And what we want to do now is be able to spread that to all schools for the whole school year. So that's an example of, I think, what has changed.
Tom, you know, on this, this reading issue is so important because the governor, Bob Taft, and the state legislature has put in this 4th grade reading mandate. Here's an example of Cincinnati Public Schools doing something concrete to advance themselves in that cause. I know you're opposed to the tax. I don't have to ask you that question, but how do you answer that sort of improvement?
Well, they should be applauded for those types of improvements, and it's a long time coming. I'm glad it's finally here, but we need to see a heck of a lot more.
So you admit that there is improvement going on?
There's always some improvement moving ahead. When you look at the test scores, some move up, some move down, but I still think that we need to see a sharper focus on improvement. We need to stop all the social experimentation, and we need to get down the basics.
What about these specifically targeted programs or aspects that they want to use the funds for this time? The smaller class sizes, the improvement in neighborhood schools, the maintenance. I mean, we all know about the building maintenance problem. How do you feel about that sort of approach, which is not just let's vote more taxes, but the school system coming to the voters and saying, here's how we're going to use this new money, and it's going to be very targeted. How do you feel about that?
Well, first of all, I feel very good about them targeting 2 mills to inflation. Our group has said for almost 2 years now that we are more than happy to support inflationary increases.
So you recognize that over a 5-year period?
We've recognized that. We've said that for 2 years now. My problem with it is, where are the other 53 mills? Where are those targeted? It's interesting now that we're going to take the 54th mill and put it towards building maintenance. Where are the other 53 mills that we've been voting for all these years? I believe the school board made a conscious effort setting priorities to let the buildings fall apart. They could have made decisions with the other 53 mills to clean up the buildings, to make them be good shape. Instead, they chose to make our teachers the highest paid teachers in Hamilton County and the highest paid teachers in the 8 urban school districts. So they made decisions that now they want us to bail them out with new tax money that they should have taken with the other 53 mills.
Lynn, on this, I mean, I don't want to get bogged down in old discussions. I mean, I want everybody to have a chance to say what they have, but I also want to try to advance the discussion a little bit. On this question of teacher pay, one of the things that happened in September that I think was very significant, and tried to focus on this in Newsmakers a couple of times, was the teachers and the school board agreed to this new evaluation system, which will be linked to a new pay system and how people get paid. Sure. How important, what would you say to the voters, what that does for the schools?
Well, you know, the facts are the facts, and Cincinnati's teachers are, in fact, very highly paid in comparison to other districts. We are not the highest in the county. But we have to look at the fact that we also have a very experienced teaching staff, which means that they are older, and we also have a very high number of teachers with master's degrees. In addition, we have over 50 teachers who have received the National Board Certification, which is the highest certification you can receive in the nation. Cincinnati is among the top 10 in the nation in the number of nationally board certified teachers. And as you have described, we now have two very, very innovative programs. They are so innovative that we are capturing national attention on it. One has to do with the teacher evaluation system, and the other is even more exciting, which is a teacher compensation system. So that for the first time—
Which are linked.
And they are linked, and for the first time, teachers will not be getting paid just because of their years of service or their advanced educational degrees, but they will be paid because they demonstrate certain competencies. This is really breakthrough stuff, and it's very exciting.
Tom, what do you think about this new system? My guess would be you would think this was going in the right direction.
Well, you know, with all these great teachers we have, you'd think we'd be turning out geniuses at all the schools, but we certainly aren't. My concern with the pay for performance is it isn't linked to the kids' test scores. And I would like to see, because when I look at the kids' test—
I want to stop. My understanding is that one of the 16 factors is test scores.
Yes,
Am I
right.
correct on that?
One of the 16
one of the
factors
16.
is student achievement. And the other factors, so that people don't think it's just fluff and air, are serious competencies that a teacher has to demonstrate.
Okay, Tom?
among their peers. But I don't, when I go and I look at test scores and I see schools where in the 6th grade achievement test, not 13 schools, not one kid passed. And being from a sales background and business background, I have to wonder why those teachers are even employed. They should have been fired right then. I mean, if they're easily to track, you can sit there and say, well, here are the 6th grade teachers, not one kid passed the proficiency test in 13 schools. This is from the 1998 schools. Why are they even employed? I mean, that's what I have to— I think that's what
Lynn,
the
that
hard
is something
questions.
that people see.
You know, and I think that's a very valid concern. It isn't quite that simplistic. However, I will also tell you that this district is the first district in Ohio and one of the first in the nation where we close down schools that are not improving on a consistent basis. And we replace the entire faculty. It's called redesign, but what it means is that the entire faculty is let go and is no longer in that school. When we have done that, we have seen significant improvement. So we are attacking those very poor performing schools, and yes, we are trying to hold teachers accountable for that poor performance. We're not where we should be, we know that, but we also know that we're improving and that our test scores continue to improve, and we're taking very dramatic steps to make a difference.
Tom, what about that redesign program?
Oh, it's great that they're making strides, but I don't see why we should go from give them another $1,000 per student, move from a $8,500 approximately per student to almost $9,500 per student.
Is that what this will do?
No, it won't. In fact, we pay, our cost per pupil is $8,007. It's kind of a hard number to say. And you know, I think it's important to put that number into context.
And
do
you know what this levy would change?
We are the 5th in terms of our per pupil spending out of the 23 districts in Hamilton County, so we're not even the highest. But we are the highest district in terms of both the number and the percentage of our students in poverty. More than 65% of our students qualify for free or reduced lunch. And in fact, 40+% of our students qualify for an old-fashioned term, welfare. And so we are dealing with the highest number of students in poverty. In Indian Hill, they spend almost $9,800 per pupil, where they have less than 1% of the students
I'm
in
very
poverty.
aware of time. Tom, I mean, this is a factor, not just for Cincinnati Public, but all urban school districts, that they are dealing not just with the teachers, but with the students who come with special needs. Isn't that, you know, when we compare numbers, isn't that something that has to be honestly be taken into effect?
Certainly, and I invite all your viewers to go to the ODE webpage, just like I did last night.
ODEA.
Ohio Department of Education
Okay.
webpage, and you'll see that per pupil spending, last time I looked, which was last night, they were 8th in the state, 8th highest in the state.
And were the other 7 on top all large urban schools?
No, Shaker Heights had like 13,000
Okay.
per
So
student.
they're spending for other reasons.
Yeah, right. And,
just like Indian Hill.
Yeah, exactly. So all I'm saying is there is a lot of money, and when the state average is around 5 or 6, you know, they are getting extra money for extra needs.
Okay. I'm out of time. Thank you for being here this morning. Interesting discussion. Didn't go exactly the way I thought it would. Tom, thank you. Lynn, thank you too. And thank you for making Newsmakers a part of your Sunday morning. Next week, Bob Bettinghouse and Todd Portune. You don't want to miss this one. Have a good week.